Hello all, Rick here with another video covering a starship from the Borg to Dominion War era and the fourth vessel in the collective of ships that made their debut in First Contact before appearing in Deep Space Nine. This time, the Saber class. Spelt alternatingly in the English RE and American ER, so that's fun. On a personal note, next to the Akira class, the Saber has to be a close favourite to come out of this collection, possibly even beating it out because of one design detail I noticed while writing this video. So, to begin with, if you have seen the other companion videos in this playlist, I am sure you can guess where the Saber class originated. It was one of four designs alongside the Akira, Steamrunner and Norway class to be designed as a ship to feature in Star Trek First Contact to bolster the Federation fleet. As with the others, it was one of several ships to emerge from a string of concepts, and elements of its design are identifiable in the drawings of Alex Yeager before being modelled at Industrial Light and Magic. The design process included the reuse of the digital Galaxy-class texture for hull elements, giving it a clear lineage and a place in the timeline, something post-Galaxy but designed alongside the newer wave of vessels. As with the other ships, the design was to be consciously different from the silhouette of the Enterprise E, so the hero ship would be identifiable in fleet manoeuvres. The vessel, like the Defiant, was also designed to be very compact, so no neck, no pylons. Like the Norway class, the final model was rougher than the hero ships and led to a less rounded design. Still, looks great in my opinion, and the one thing that I noticed, the secondary hull is tapered to a triangle, which is obvious. But when looking at the rear view, you can see that it is actually tapered with a rear overhang that reminds me of the stern of an old sailing galleon. And that instantly catapulted up the rungs for my ship tier list, because now I see it as a Star Trek take on a fantasy airship, and that's my jam. In universe, this is pretty much tied into its development too. It was indeed created alongside the other ships that were being designed to survive the Borg. The Akira was a patrol and exploratory vessel, the Defiant was an experimental and overpowered escort. The Norway was a highly specialised crisis response vessel, and the Steamrunner a strike and survey ship. The Sabre, as the name implies, was a combat ship in its entirety. Now, not to say that it could not undertake other duties, but the Sabre class was there to support larger vessels in fleet combat without the extended design time and tuning that was required to forge a Defiant class. It was to be a tactical escort and patrol vessel, so expected to see trouble frequently either deployed to combat it or on the hunt for ne'er-do-wells. I always wanted to use ne'er-do-wells and miscreants. Vessels produced were often named after various cultures' bladed weapons, such as the Ushan or Rapier, but less aggressive names were dedicated to an array of historical and mythological references, so this was by no means a standard. The Advanced Ship Design Bureau began work on it in 2370 and commissioned the first ship, the USS Sabre NX-61900. In the same year, at least two more were launched, the Jaeger NCC 61947 and Argo 61357. The primary shipyard working on these designs was Utopia Planitia, while the propulsion systems were worked on at the Cochrane complex at Proxima Centauri and other systems at the Andorian Imperial shipyards. One feature that might not be initially noticed is that it had a forward-facing launch bay, which plays very well with its interception roles. While chasing down pirates, for example, it could launch shuttles ahead of it for boarding actions if needed. Its sensor systems, too, were tuned for artificial sources more than scientific survey, meaning that it had better eyes for detecting other ships than observing the stars, although this is a Starfleet ship we're talking about, so of course it still had above-par scanners on a galactic average. The Sabre class is a very compact and flat vessel, following the design ethos of ships of the time, reducing its profile for both subspace warp reasons and combat. It was 160 metres long, 111 metres wide, and only 62 metres tall, although there are some deviations in the scale from other sources, and these are closer to the on-screen scaled size, which was 190 metres, and it certainly is almost as wide as it is long, so I'd say closer to 150 metres wide. It had a very minimal 6 decks and a crew of only 40 personnel, although it could house up to 200 for emergencies. Being a smaller vessel like the Defiant, it was greatly manoeuvrable at impulse speeds. Later models have even an additional impulse engine across the front, meaning that this ship seems capable of some crazy turns and brakes, as well as being able to fly backwards with a degree of effectiveness, although I could only find one reference to this. Its warp drive was up to date for the time, eclipsed by the Sovereign class, but on par with its contemporary ships. It could cruise at warp 6, and reach warp 9.7 for 12 hours before engine shutdown. Considering its scale, this is pretty impressive and calls to mind the Norway and Defiant style warp cores that were highly advanced but more compact. In terms of armaments, the Sabre was very well decked out considering its required role. It had 4 Type 10 phaser arrays and 2 photon torpedo launchers. However, most of its weaponry was forward-facing, with only 1 phaser array able to hit rear targets. This gave it an obvious exploit. However, as mentioned, it was very nimble, so the trade-off was mitigated by its manoeuvrability. Being in this line of sight was a recipe for a very bad day. Its 4 shuttle bay featured 2 Type 8 shuttlecraft, but that's it aside from the worker bees. Like most other ships expected to see combat, it was decked out in ablative armour after the Defiant pioneered the way. In fact, that's a good summary for the Sabre class. That the Defiant tested the waters for a compact, high-speed, high-power escort, and the Sabre was the follow-up ship. It was easier to construct, slightly larger, meaning that it could be deployed for other duties, and had greater patrol potential, and had less chance of spontaneously exploding if you turned too hard at high speeds. The Sabre class pretty much rose to be one of my favourite ships the more I look into it, and honestly, I think it stands a chance of staying around longer than the Defiant class, considering it's big enough to be retooled into other roles if needed. That about covers the Sabre class. Thanks for watching this breakdown. I've been Rick, and until the next one, goodbye.